Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Two Dads, One Car, where we talk about modern fatherhood. My friends, you may notice a different background because this is a historical first. I'm currently in Mexico. That's right, we are in a wholly different country. We're about to interview and re-interview a guest of mine who was on the show maybe 2 years ago. His name is Gregor, and he's moved over to Mexico, and just like that, it's starting to downpour, which is hilarious. So you might hear the rain coming in, the birds. It's so magical here. It's amazing. And so we're gonna be chatting with my friend Gregor to see how he's doing. He now has 2 kids and he's living abroad by the beach. And so we'll be checking that out in just shortly. So I'm gonna hop in my car, not the usual car, a rental car, a little tiny one, but I'm gonna go inside. It's starting to rain, but we'll chat more. Cheers, bye. So I did an introduction to you earlier. It was in the middle of the rain.
Nice.
I'm like, this feels like Mexico. Gregor, before I start, I'm so excited for this. This has been on a goal of mine. Like, okay, if this podcast is still running, this is gonna be the first repeat guest, and I'm gonna be in Mexico, and we're here. South of Cancun, and you're in the car with me. This is unreal. So
we're driving down to the Caribbean right now. I know. So we actually ended the last one, which was 2 years ago or something like that. I can't remember. And we said, I was moving to Mexico City. And I said, we should do a follow-up in Mexico City. But
I didn't believe you.
But it's been overtaken by events. I've left Mexico City, and now I'm in close to Cancun.
Well, why don't you catch us up to where you're at? Because you have number of kids, ages. I know some interesting news recently.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so Ro, my son, is almost exactly the same age as Avery. So almost 3.5 now. And we just had another baby, a girl, Adela. So she's 6 weeks old, 5 or 6 weeks old, which has been unbelievable. And she was born in Mexico, which is amazing. So it's interesting. It's like my wife can predict all these things. A couple of years ago, we were here in this area, and she was like, "I want to go look at a birth center here." And I was like, "Why? You know, like we're not having a second child yet. Like, what are you talking about?" And that was the birth center she ended up having birth at. So it's almost like she either knew the whole thing or had some vision for how she wanted it to work. So yeah, we lived in Mexico City for a year. I told you we had this remarkable experience where we basically walked into someone else's life. We rented their apartment. We went into their friend circle. We went straight into a lifestyle in Mexico City, which was remarkable. We met amazing people there. And then for Ro, our son, he was 2 at the time. He turned 2 as soon as we arrived in Mexico City. It was an amazing experience. It was basically like living in New York in Mexico. We were walking every day. Just a vibrant lifestyle there. He went to an amazing school. He was super happy. Yeah. We had a really good lifestyle there. But when Michelle got pregnant, we decided to move because it's also got a lot of pollution. So Michelle didn't want to be there during her pregnancy.
Well, that's amazing. What an update.
Yeah, I know.
Before we jump in some more, what's been an unspoken truth about fatherhood for you so far? This is a different stage. When we first talked, it was like the sleep deprivation.
That was so real.
It was so real. What is it now? What is unspoken truth for you?
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I think the biggest thing is what I'm realizing now is it is virtually impossible to explain parenting to people. If you haven't done it, if you haven't been in it, I think it is impossible to explain why we do this, why we love it, why it's such a focus for all of us. Like you and I spend hours talking about parenting and fatherhood. And I think for a lot of people, it's challenging. They want to understand and they ask us questions, but if you haven't been in it, it's so difficult to explain what this is all about.
And it's wild.
Right, it is wild. It's like a comparison point that I sometimes take. It's like, it's not rational. It makes no sense. So it's kind of impossible to explain in rational terms. How do you explain that you can have a day of total chaos, right?
How's that fun?
Right, like exactly. And it's like everything falls apart, everything goes wrong, But at the end of the day, you're sitting there with your partner, and if you're lucky, you have that moment where you're like, oh wow, that was kind of amazing actually. Or they're sleeping and you look at them and you're like, oh my. So it's overly simplistic and slightly cliche, but the biggest thing is the love, those moments of love make up for everything else. And it continues from the point I made last time. So I think that's the biggest thing is I think you and I have spent a lot of time talking about fatherhood and parenthood, but one of the things that kind of stuns me is how did I not know how to do this the first time when millions of people have done this before, why is it that I was such an amateur the first time? Because it's impossible to understand when someone says, oh, make sure you do this, or this is going to happen. I don't know. You don't really believe them.
No,
I thought, right? I was like, it's going to be different for me, or that won't happen to us because we're going to do it differently. It's like, no, it happens to everyone. It's difficult for everyone. Parenting is hard. I thought I was going to be really good at boundaries.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I was like, okay, I get this. I understand how it works. I understand boundaries. I teach boundaries for people.
That's right.
And then my 2-year-old was able to basically influence me in a way in which I was like, I don't even know what's going on anymore. Like, he's outsmarted me. He's 2 years old, and somehow he was outsmarted. So part of it is like the things that I thought would be so easy did not turn out to be so easy. And it turned out to be really different than I expected. So part of it is, I think having the second baby, although it's very recent, has been really interesting because it is so much easier. Like, it's so much easier. Now, she is really chill. She's, she sleeps really well and everything like that. But at the same time, our level of, I suppose, stress or anxiety is so much lower.
Yes, because you've been through it before.
Yeah, and
bit,
that
right?
these things end. We were talking about this.
Yeah.
Sometimes when you're in it, you're like, oh my gosh, I can't do this. Like, it's too much. When does this end? Everything's a phase, everything ends, and then you get this awareness around it.
Well, I mean, the biggest takeaway I came from our last episode, even just now, is just those reminders. The fact that we talked about discomfort and taking on our kids' discomfort for comfort. Also talk about phases.
Yeah.
I mean, on the way here, as you may know, we took a red-eye flight.
Yeah.
And the whole time my daughter was not sleeping.
I know.
Like, she was
You said it was the whole flight.
I was like, wow. But I was like, Gregor's voice in my head, take on the discomfort for her comfort. And just like, gave her a lollipop, and just like rolled around a little bit.
She was happy.
And I'm like, all right. And it actually, when you talk about describing like the chaos of it, people are like, why would you want to go through this?
Well, I think that's it. Why would you want to do this? It is so impossible to explain, like a night flight where your child doesn't sleep, and then you think, why is this fun? Why would you do this? But it turns out that the traveling is so worth it. You were asking me last week, because we traveled a lot with Ro.
Yes.
And a lot. And some people were like, what are you thinking? Going on these 18-hour flights and things like that.
Yeah.
Well, it's worth it, but this is what you're trying to balance. The problem is there was certainly moments where I'm like, am I doing this for me or am I doing this for Ro? Because Michelle and I love traveling.
Yes.
So it's like, does Ro love traveling, or is he just in part of our life that he doesn't really have a say in it?
Yes.
And I sometimes got in my head about this. I'm like, what if he just wants to stay home? We had a funny moment. We traveled all around the world. We're living in Mexico. And last night, Ro was talking about something. We said, Ro, where is your favorite place in the world? And I was expecting some fantastic. He's like, Calgary. And I was like, we left Calgary on purpose. Now, Calgary's a great place, but we've been to a lot of places, and we're living on the Caribbean of Mexico. He loves Calgary. That's where he wants to go. So it brings us back to this point of what is best for your child. Well, first of all, impossible to know.
Yeah.
You really can't tell because, they'll verbalize the craziest things. But there's certainly this thing about parenting from the perspective of your own preferences, right?
Yeah, absolutely, right? Because it's like, my preference is this, and then that's theirs, but sometimes it's not.
Sometimes it's not.
Right?
I mean, you and I know this from growing up. Everybody knows this. Especially as you get older, you feel like your parents are deciding things with a lack of awareness about who you are as a person and what you like. So we're trying to be really aware of this. Now, Ro's 3, it doesn't necessarily matter so much, but there's a lot to thinking about cognition, our own cognition, and how we make decisions. How open we are to risk, the things that we want to do, and what's best for our child.
This is so many different jumping off points here, which I love about these kind of conversations. But let's talk about cognition. And I love to get your perspective on this. And just for a quick background, like Gregor talked to us about cognitive preferences when he was coaching clients. And what are you seeing when it comes to your own children, like your own son? What have you started noticing? I know Ro's just above 3. But
I have noticed things already. So I used to tell a story about after I did a keynote talk on cognitive preferences, and a parent came up to me and she said, Gregor, after listening to you speak, I'm pretty sure I'm parenting my child incorrectly because I think they think very differently than me. And I remember being slightly flippant about it. I'm like, yeah, it's entirely possible, but I'm not a parent. But here's what I suggest you do. But the same thing happened to me. I realized that I unless it's just a phase, I do believe that Ro is potentially intensely structural in his thinking. Now, it could just be a phase, but he is constantly asking, what are we doing? What time we're doing it at? What's happening next? When does evening come? What's happening the next day? When is Christmas coming? And I'm, as you know, I'm totally non-structural.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's actually cognitively uncomfortable for me. Like sometimes I just freeze because he's like, what are we doing this afternoon? I'm like, I have no idea.
Yeah, I don't hear
You know, like, I don't know. Like, you know, I'm just trying to get through the day. But what I realized is, and he does relax when I give it to him. So either he has, because nobody knows if cognitive preferences are developed when you're young, or it could be the environment, or nobody knows. But when they're children, you can't actually assess a child's cognitive preferences. They're internal. So there's a lot to this. One of the interesting aspects of cognition is also related to a child's behavior. Do you know anyone or who either identifies or has children with ADHD?
Not yet. No.
Not yet?
No,
Okay.
actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you probably know.
A lot of kids might be a little younger.
Yeah, there are a lot of children and adults
Yeah.
who are getting diagnosed with ADHD.
Right.
But what's interesting about it is ADHD, I believe, is heavily correlated to a cognitive preference that I refer to as conceptual thinking. And ADHD, I believe, is a series of behaviors that are often viewed as unhelpful or disruptive in a classroom.
Yes, that's
right? So, you know, what happens is children get diagnosed with ADHD. But what's interesting about it is if you look at it from the perspective of cognition, conceptual thinking, you look at a child who's a conceptual thinker, these behaviors are completely normal and expected to do that type of behavior. So what's interesting as an example is, I actually printed out because I thought you'd want to see this. I printed out a list of these 18 behaviors.
18?
Yeah, there's 18 of them. So there is no test to see if a child has ADHD.
Right.
What it is a teacher or a counselor or a specialist will observe them or potentially ask them questions, but normally talk with the teacher or the caregiver and ask a series of questions about their behavior. What I just did was I filled it out for Ro.
Okay.
Okay, because he's 3.
Yes.
And so he, according to this, has ADHD.
Oh.
Like everything, because here are the questions. Like, does not give close attention to details. No, Ro is 3.
Yeah.
And this is for preschoolers, by the way. Right? This is for 3 to 5-year-olds. So he's 3, and he doesn't pay attention to details. He leaves his seat in the classroom or during meals or other situation in which you're expected to sit.
Yeah.
I can't sit in a chair for very long.
Yeah.
I get uncomfortable. During meetings, I want to get up and leave too, and I often do. Right? And they're 3. Climbs excessively. Well, that's very subjective. What's climbing excessively, right? Kind of depends. Has difficulty organizing tasks and activities.
Oh my
Stephen,
gosh.
I have difficulty organizing tasks and activities, right?
Yeah.
So what's interesting about this is you start entering the realm of what behaviors are completely normal for children.
That's right.
Right? And which ones are we trying to control? Right?
Ooh, this is a good topic.
Isn't it?
This is a good topic.
Because this is very interesting. We get into the realm of what is natural for children, especially when we look at the higher spectrums of cognition. Because you look at a very brilliant, bright child. That means they're at the higher ends of the spectrum for cognition.
That's right.
So behaviors get exaggerated. And behaviors are often an output of feeling cognitively uncomfortable.
Yes.
Right? You and I talk about this a lot. So is a child who's fidgeting, is that actually a byproduct of them being bored? What if the classroom is just not interesting for them? Is it the child who's at fault? Or is the classroom at fault?
So the reason why I'm so passionately thrilled about this topic is I love reading and I love knowing about this because what comes to mind is that what are we measuring on, right?
That's right.
Are we producing cogs in a machine like a robot, all right? Or are we otherwise, it's like, and also even with humans, right? You think about, we talked about nature, talking about environment.
Yes.
Like, if I have an environment when it's noisy and chaotic, I'm gonna feel frustrated.
Of course.
Anybody would.
Right? Of course. And we're looking at environments that are often not conducive to a child's state of relaxation, right? So they're potentially, they have cognitive anxiety or cognitive discomfort. So you're absolutely right. Like, we compare this to ourselves and we realize we've learned to manage it, but
Yes.
it wasn't necessarily good for us. So as an example, for you and I to fit into our careers, we certainly learn certain behaviors. Like, okay, don't interrupt, do this. But it doesn't change the fact that I wanted to interrupt. And maybe it's good to have a child who interrupts with a creative idea. You're right. Are we potentially producing children who are quiet and well behaved?
Yeah.
Right? Like what rather than childish and creative and expressive, And
it's like, it's so, and there's so many layers to this. And I just think back, I think you may have, I forget who shared with me. There was a video of these kids in Japan. It was like 3 or 4 year olds just like organizing boxes and lunches, right?
Yeah.
And Michelle's like, wow, look at this. I'm like, yes, but at the same time, like, I'm not broad strokes, but it's like, what are we training for, right?
What are we trying to teach them?
And are we teaching creativity, entrepreneurship? As you and I talked about yesterday, there's so much creativity now. There's technology. There's ability. The world is really abundant in the way.
It is.
At the same time, like, what is this, right? It's.
Well, this is for me where I really get fascinated, like you, because it's like, what are we trying to teach them? Because I mean, there's no question that there are certain behaviors that we need to learn, right? But do we need to learn them at 3? Do we need to learn them at 5, 7, 9, 13, or do we learn them later? And then the other thing is, yes, of course, I'm suggesting that potentially we don't teach them these things, but what happens then? Because society's not built to incorporate highly conceptual thinkers or highly social thinkers. So if we don't teach them certain behaviors, does that mean they're not successful in life? So it's really interesting for me because I love creativity, but I also recognize that my own creativity was sometimes a detriment to my own career and fitting in certain areas. I'm an entrepreneur now, as you know, almost out of necessity.
That's great.
Right? Yeah, I love it, but I struggle to fit into corporate environments. Now, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
That's right. And
we don't know.
Who doesn't know? The reason this brings back a memory actually of grade 1. My grade 1 teacher. She was very much someone who there's others like visual learners, auditory learners, kinesthetic, right? And she was very much like an auditory, just like lectures, like.
By the way, did you know that approach has been debunked?
There we go.
Right? That the idea of learning styles has been disproven.
So I was having a hard time at grade 1, right? And I thought I was going to be left behind.
Yes.
Right? And it wasn't the moment that there was like, no, actually, it's a different teaching style. Right?
Okay, this is so interesting. So it's the same for me. I was going to fail grade 1 because of my reading challenges. My mother, and they were teaching I went to school in Scotland in the first few years, and they were teaching reading in a different way, and it just didn't work for me.
No.
Couldn't get it.
No.
And so they're going to hold me back. And my mother taught me a different way. I believe it's phonetically. And straight away I was able to adapt and catch up. But what's interesting about this is, there's no question that you and I have capabilities in these areas, but we weren't in a learning environment that suited us. Luckily, right? So luckily either someone helped us or we found, but you and I were going to be held back. Both of us would have been held back.
Absolutely.
Right? What's interesting about this is how many children are being held back or being ignored or being told to behave differently or are being silenced or don't feel comfortable.
Yeah, they're being told that there's
something wrong with
labels,
them. Right? But there's potentially, and I think potentially to be safe, but I'm just about absolutely sure about this, there's nothing wrong with them.
No.
There's nothing wrong. Now, there are cases where we need to provide specific help to children, but what's more important than that is I think we need to really start looking at the environments that we educate our children in, that we raise our children in, and what it comes down to is cognitive diversity. We need to start creating environments of extreme cognitive diversity.
This is so fascinating. I mean, look at us. We're right now in Mexico.
Right?
We look at all the different plants around us.
I know, it's amazing here.
Right? There's different, even talking about the environment around us, right?
Yes.
Some prefer more sun, less sun, different soil types, different light types, and it's a matter of environment. right? How do we create that
where
environment?
everyone can thrive, even people at the most extreme ends of the spectrum. You know, it's come from a good place, I'm sure, a lot of the educational kind of approaches, but I think we're missing the point here that there is no standard behavior. There is no, you know, children listen different. I listen very differently than you. One of the questions on this assessment for children is, you know, how they listen. I don't listen in a normal way. I don't listen to everything.
No,
I teach this all the time. People listen very differently.
Yeah.
You know, you listen differently than me. So how do we make an environment for children? It's, for me, a valid concern, a very personal concern, because Ro's 3. He's in this amazing school in the jungle right now.
Yeah.
And it's all outdoors, and it's very play-based and very free. But that school comes to an end in a couple years, and then, you know, we're going to have to find another place to go. One of the reasons we came here was for this school. So after that, what do we do? You know, do you put him in regular schooling? You know, what if it doesn't work for him? You know, my fear is that we dampen some of this enthusiasm and creativity and joy that he has for learning right now. Because, you know, school was not always great for us.
That's right.
I mean, you did really well in school, obviously. You're now a professor, you're lecturing at a university. But even university is not designed for everyone.
No,
it's designed for certain types of people to excel at.
And also, like, the traditional way of now, as I took on a new role this year as a professor, as I teach law.
Yeah.
But even if you look at, like, the traditional ways of teaching versus now, you can't apply the same concepts.
No.
Even though law students are in the classroom, their styles are different.
Completely
Different. You can't just be there. I mean, the traditional professor just stands on front of the stage and just lectures.
That works for a certain percentage of the population
very minor.
who are exactly. It is very minor.
Yeah, but
it's very minor, right? So again, this goes back to what we were talking about. We've really been directing the idea that we're trying to fit children and young people into a system that is not very inclusive.
So how have you started with this view? How have you started to, when you look at Ro, and
it's been hard.
Right? How do you? I don't know if we use the word apply, but how have you been more aware of it?
Yeah. Okay, so I've really been trying to incorporate the idea of cognitive diversity in our own life. Okay. I have a single dominant preference for conceptual thinking, which most people have multiple preferences. You have 3, so they balance each other out quite well. As you know, I have 1. So I'm very single-minded in my thinking. What I'm trying to do with creating an environment for Ro is also incorporate the other areas, social, structural, and analytical. I'm trying to make sure that I'm giving him an environment that has, I don't always do it perfectly, Michelle and I struggle with it, but we try our best to create an environment where, you know, as an example, the easiest way to do it is bring in different people into your life. You met his uncle and aunt the other day, and when, you know, his uncle, calls him his Opa, is a person who's very good at teaching in a very analytical, rational way. And Ro thrives. He loves it. Like, watching him learn from Win is so different than the way I do things with him. And it was almost uncomfortable for me. I was like, he doesn't need that much information, or you don't need to give him all the steps. But Ro was thriving. He was like and then what I realized is, this is of course what used to happen. Before this incredibly individualistic approach that we have to parenting now, of course, we all know this, it used to be done much more in groups.
And now you have this, like, customizable ability, right?
Yeah.
And if we could give the listeners, because you and I are so well versed in this, like a snapshot of the 4 preferences that we're talking about here. And then I have a question right after that.
So very briefly, most people have multiple preferences. These preferences are hardwired basically in your mid-20s, and they don't change for the rest of your life. And they affect the way you internalize and process information. So they're really important for understanding both how you internalize information and how you interact with other people. And they play a massive role, I believe, in how we parent. So analytical, data-driven, you require data, evidence, and proof, highly rational. Structural thinking, sequence and order. You know, this is people who really like to organize things in their brain. Conceptual, like me, interested in new ideas, options, tangential, creative thinking. And then social thinking, which is the idea that they constantly connect information to people. So you, as an example, right, are trimodal, conceptual, structural, social.
That's right.
With a dominant social.
Exactly.
Right. So and it shows in the way that you your hobbies, your passions. Your main thing is connecting ideas to people.
Love it,
In
yes.
almost everything that you do.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Secondary to that, for you, you have equal conceptual and structural.
That's right.
You're very gifted at taking an idea and making it real. Like this podcast, like a lot of the things, like you're right.
That's
but you can imagine, for me, as a singular conceptual thinker, I have lots of ideas. I'm not always very good at putting them into reality. I need a lot of help with that, and that's been my struggle. So as an example, the reason I brought up ADHD is I have all of the traits of ADHD, but I do not consider myself to have ADHD. I consider myself to be a unimodal conceptual thinker.
Okay.
And I use that to my advantage, and then I'm very aware of what I need help with and what I need to work on.
And being another fellow conceptual thinker, the
Yes.
concept that I
Yes.
got from what you just
Yes.
said earlier, it is understanding and being aware of what your child's preferences may be, and things evolve over time.
And they're going to be different.
yes.
It's highly statistically unlikely that your child has the same preferences as you.
Yes.
Right? So Avery, it's very unlikely she's going to have the same trimodal profile as you, and it's going to be different than Michelle as well.
Yes.
And so there's potentially a biological reason behind that. Nobody knows. But these things are not inherited. So that's what's interesting about this is she thinks differently than you. And so part of it, and you know this, you're starting to see it already. The challenges come when we start taking that as being difficult, or they're not fitting into our parenting style.
Yes.
But it is difficult. Like, it's cognitively uncomfortable when your child is thinking in a way that's different than you. Like I said, I've had moments where Rose says something, I'm like, whoa, you just blew my mind. Like, I have no idea how to respond to that. You know? Like, he's planning things out in his head sometimes days in advance. I don't even know what I'm doing that afternoon.
Oh, wow.
You know?
This the story you just said earlier about Win as well.
Yeah.
It reminded me of this moment I noticed yesterday, actually.
Yeah.
So Win was teaching Ro the concept of balance.
No way.
And Ro was so captivated.
Really?
Because Win had this fishing, the pool pole.
Yeah, yeah.
And his hand, putting his hand in different areas of the pole to show what balance
No
what is
way.
it. He was captured. Like, he was
Really?
looking, and Win was explaining in a very structural manner.
Yeah. Here, do
it is.
this. Move your hand here. That's exactly how he explains things.
Yes. And because of that, he's like, I get it. And so what's interesting...
No way. Okay, so you just call it, by the way. So I just did an assessment on Win, and his dominant preference is structural. So you called it. The way. So what he was doing was he was explaining it in a way that he likes to have things explained to him.
Yes.
And it happened.
Yes.
It happened to work for Ro. But what's interesting is not necessarily. He didn't know that about Ro. It just happened to work.
Yeah. Because I saw Ro and looked. And so this is such a fascinating play, because I think the picture here is that when we understand how our child, even ourselves,
Yes.
what our preferences, then we know how to adjust things.
Yeah, we know how to adjust it.
Right? And
Overcome our bias.
I think what you're not saying is essentially like, okay, this is the one way, the only way.
No.
Or we must, do one like medium that accommodates everybody.
not at all. It
Because,
doesn't work.
It doesn't work,
No,
right?
it's the opposite. It's actually to bring in extreme diversity. So like you say, there's different ways to do that. You either create an environment that is conducive to that, which is quite challenging to do, or you make yourself a little bit uncomfortable
Yes.
and bring in people who think differently than you
Yes.
as people into your child's life.
Yes.
And you, like, as an example, I would have found it difficult, because I wasn't there when that was happening. I would have found it difficult not to have interrupted Win and be like, Win, it's too complicated. Or, don't worry about it. Just have a good time with the net, Ro. Like, that's me. But what's interesting is Ro still repeats things that Win has taught him over the years. And in sequence, he remembers it in detail. And it's completely different than me. So the hard truth is that we are not always the best people to teach our children things.
Yes, that is
Right?
a really good hard truth.
That's hard. Right? When you realize it's like, wow, someone else is better. An uncle, an aunt, a friend, a babysitter, a teacher, whoever it is. And teachers are not experts in cognitive diversity, by the way.
No.
Not at all.
Yeah.
In fact, they're, for the most part, completely unaware that there are different thinking preferences at play here.
Yeah.
So sometimes I think we put a lot of onus on a teacher to tell us how to do things. They often don't know any better than anyone else when it really comes down to cognition.
Right. And
This is kind of cool here.
I think there's a lot of, again, I think what I want to carry on through here with this conversation is we're not necessarily like bashing teachers, right?
Not at all.
Like, I have many friends who are teachers, and it's a tough job.
Oh,
it
of
is
course.
a tough role. And one of my past who was a teacher, it's like there are so many things pulling it. But I think what we're saying here is that what if there's ways we could supplement, right?
Exactly,
If you have the ability
support and supplement. Part of it is putting so much pressure on a teacher to teach in a way that works for a classroom of 15 or 20 children. That's incredibly difficult to do, right? All different levels of cognition and behavior and all these sort of things. So part of it goes right back to it is, and Michelle and I have struggled with this, is building community. Because we move so often.
Yes.
We struggle sometimes to maintain community. So we try, and each place we go is to build a new community. We started to build it here. But we have times where we're a bit hard on ourselves because we feel like Roe needs this community. Because we don't have, as you know, close family here. And we didn't previously either. So part of it is we rely a lot on friends and family members. And then we have people who we make a point of visiting in Canada to do this. But we don't have that community that some people have. And I think part of it is, again, I use this word, highly individualistic.
Yeah.
A lot of us are parenting on our own to our own detriment.
This is hilarious because these are the two topics I wanted to talk about today.
Really?
And I never preface my guests on the questions.
No, you didn't.
Right? And I was just gonna do like a pivot point, but you just pivoted already.
Pivoted.
Which is because I do want to ask about this topic here is about the sense of community. Because you moved down to Mexico, you live in Mexico City. Recently you're in another, like a beach town, which is, I love it, by the way.
It's amazing. Yeah.
But I was going to ask the challenges of the community.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons we moved to Mexico was for community. It's a culture that's very warm towards children. So as an example, when we go to the beach to play, and there's a popular tourist season here, which is kind of right now, and then the rest of the year it's fairly quiet here. But the local people here are so warm and inviting, and we'll be on the beach and other families will invite them over. And that's one of the things that we loved about Mexico. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons is we knew that without having a family community, we'd have to build our own community. So we went to a place where it's easy to build it. Every time we go out, there's people who are, inviting Ro to play, and we have neighbors already that we've met who are inviting him over. So we have like instant community. So what we do is we just have to do it very consciously. Yeah. It's easier sometimes for my wife, Michelle, than me. I spend a lot of time, my work, I do it in isolation. My work is basically thinking about thinking. And so that work is done in isolation. And sometimes, and I'm not proud to say this, but sometimes I'm like, I feel like it's work to go and meet people and interact with people. I'd rather just do this. Yeah. I want to, my work sometimes I feel takes a back seat to some, but of course you have to do it. It takes a lot of time to build friendships and community. So that's what we have to do. But it's worth it for exactly what we're talking about, to create this cognitive diversity, to have different input, different language. Ro speaks Spanish fluently, right? Probably better than he speaks English, to be honest.
Yes.
He speaks certain English words with his great accent, right? A Mexican accent. And then he corrects my Spanish all the time, which is great. So yeah, it's what we've had to do. So we purposely chose a place, knowing that we needed to build community. We went to a place in which it's easy to build community. So we've made some strategic choices on lifestyle to make things as easy as possible for us. And then the other thing was, you saw this yesterday, was we went to a place where it's easy to be outdoors. Yes. Because we believe that being outdoors is the easiest way to occupy.
I feel like that's universal.
It is, completely. Like yeah. And that's why we left Canada, right? That's one of the reasons. The weather was just not, for a large part of the year, the weather wasn't good enough. Yeah. So that's made it really easy.
I do get the sense, and touching what you just said there, I do get the sense of warmth here. Not just like weather-wise, but also in people and building community. Definitely. And in children as well too. Yeah. Right? And I think what you said earlier, but oh man, it feels hard to like do these things because, like you said earlier, you're like very hyper-conceptual, right? I am. Social might not be a thing.
No, it's not.
But you're aware that this could be helpful. That's it. This environment creates it. And I love this intentionality behind it.
Yeah, thanks. That's a good word, intentionality. Right? It was a choice we made, and we're very happy with the choice that we've made. We're going to stay here for a while. Adela was born here. She's Mexican. And so we have a family connection to this country. and I hope that we stay here for a while. Now, we get restless all the time. We'll move again, I'm sure. But for now, it's turning out to be really quite ideal for us. And especially like the things that are difficult,
Yes.
I think if you have a choice, go to a place or be in a place to make it as easy as possible to do the difficult things.
Yes.
And sometimes it's not your native country. Sometimes it's not the environment that you grew up in or that you're currently living in. And of course that makes it challenging at times, but I think overall, Michelle and I always talk about this, overall it's been more than worth it for us.
This is a callback to our first discussion about embracing the comfort
Yes.
to create comfort.
Yes.
And you, Gregor, are embracing the comfort to
you.
create comfort
Thank you, yeah.
for your children here and being a complete different environment.
Yeah.
And this is just wow. If I could close out, last question here.
Yeah.
What is something you're excited about in this next
Ooh.
chapter of fatherhood for you?
Wow. So 2 children I'm so excited about. Raising a girl, I'm very excited about. I grew up in a family of boys,
Yeah.
so I'm really, really excited to raise a girl. I'm really excited that Michelle and I are in a phase now where we feel like we can do this now. I think we struggled. We told you that. A lot of parents do, and we're very, very honest about that. Is we did struggle with some of the challenges with our first child. It was difficult. It was overwhelming for us. But now we know we can do this, and so we're excited to just really make this life as vibrant as possible. So we're excited to travel again. We're just planning another trip last night, and we're going to travel as much as possible in the first couple of years with Adela while she's not running around as much. And yeah, just keep on doing what we're doing. It's basically just more of the same is what we're excited about.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Thanks.
And is the trip to Calgary?
Yeah, it is a trip to Calgary because Ro talks about it all the time. So we're going to France, but before we go to France, we're going to be spending a week in Calgary because that's his favorite place. He wants to go to Calgary, so we're going to Calgary.
Embracing the comfort for the
Right?
comfort.
Embrace the discomfort. Yeah.
Well, I am so excited to
Thanks.
track this journey. I love it here. I can't wait to be back. Maybe we'll spend like a month or two out
You
here.
should.
And I think
You should. We hang out. We'll build our own community. It'd be great.
Oh my gosh. Well, we'll do a
should.
debrief after this, but I'll find a way back to your place because I just ran onto the highway.
That's okay. It's easy. We just flip around. You can do U-turns on the highway.
Yeah, probably good. Well, thanks for being on the show, Gregor,
Thanks.
and we'll find a way back.
Thanks.
All right, friends, that's a wrap. Man, what a conversation. I can't believe I'm still here in Mexico. Just had a great chat with Gregor, and so many takeaways from the conversation. You could hear me getting really excited because we talked about cognitive preferences and kind of how that applies to our own children. I'll put a link to more of Gregor's work in the description, but man, gives me a whole new takeaway to understand and see my daughter in a different light and understand what her preferences are and adapting that when it comes to teaching, when it comes to learning, when it comes to speaking, because that's kind of where the mastery is. And so with that, thank you again, Gregor, for being on the show. Once again, thanks for inviting us to your place to spend time with you, to your neighborhood. It's been so great to have you in my life and in my circle of friends. And for everybody else, thank you for listening in. Again, we're on YouTube, we're on Apple Podcasts, we're on Spotify. Check us out on 2dads1car.com. Also, give me a follow on LinkedIn. Love to chat with you on LinkedIn and beyond. And so with that, see you at the next episode, maybe in a different country. We'll see. Cheers. Bye.